While the Johannesburg International Festival is back once again and will feature a host of international as well as local comedians to tickle your funny bone. This festival is the biggest independent international comedy fest in Africa, and this year marks its third edition that will take over the Nelson Mandela as well as the Fringe theatres at the Joburg Theatre. Loyiso Gola, Vlismas, Tumi Morake are just some of the comedians set to feature at the festival. But to tell us more, we are joined in studio by founder and director Takunda Bimha, as well as a comedian Prins. Gentlemen, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for making the time.
Thanks for having us.
Geez, Takunda, when we look at your career, it spans over a decade. You've been in the comedy space for quite a while, having been involved with shows like Pure Monati and managing some of the top comedian talent. And then you started this festival. What struck you when you looked at this concept and thought that this would be something that works and that Africa currently needs?
Sure. Thanks, Paul. And so, yeah, I think, my background in comedy spans over 15 years, and started off with producing the Pure Monati show, and then I went on to manage comedians like Trevor Noah and Loyiso Gola and Kagiso Lediga and many others. And I think within that management space, I traveled around the world quite a lot and went to big festivals all over the world. And my travels made me realize that the caliber of comedy that we have in South Africa and across the continent is actually of an extremely high standard. But we didn't have the platforms, international platforms, that would link us into the rest of the international comedy fraternity, So for me, I felt that an international comedy festival that would put the spotlight on South African comedy and African comedy on a global scale would be almost a contribution to starting to connect us and getting us closer to having a seat at the international comedy table. So that was the inspiration behind the festival. And there's hundreds of international comedy festivals all over the world, but Africa didn't have a single one. So I felt that was a sort of travesty, in many ways. And I just felt that we need to sort of give a platform that, the world can sort of look at African comedy in a different way.
Now, comedy has sort of been slow in growth when you look at it in the African context,
Sure.
where you're speaking about platforms that weren't necessarily available for comedians. And also just generally, a lot of people did not look at comedy as a career option.
Absolutely.
But of course, that has changed over the years.
Yeah.
If you look at back then and right now, what do you spot as the biggest difference in comedy?
Well, I think, and I always say this in interviews, especially when I'm doing stuff overseas, as Africans, comedy has always been part of our fabric. Do you know what I mean? Like, all over the continent, comedy is a way we deal with the, tough issues of life and so forth. Comedy is the way we sort of pass on tradition and so forth. And everyone sort of knows somebody who's extremely funny. The thing is, it just hadn't been professionalized into an occupation or vocation, and although like the established comedy industries in the UK and the US have been, around for a long time, we just didn't have that. So we had the funny, we've always had the funny, but it hadn't been sort of formalized into a business, and that's starting to happen. And I think for me, what excites me is that, we just need to build the infrastructure, and the structures and put processes in place for us to have a formalized comedy industry, but the funny we already have in bucket loads.
All right, and we've got the funny right here in studio this morning.
Yes.
Prince, you came all the way from the Eastern Cape to come and build a life and build your comedy here in Johannesburg. Geez, what's been the biggest sort of culture shock for you, having come from the Eastern Cape to Joburg to, grow and make a name for yourself?
Yeah, I'd say the whole thing, because Johannesburg and the town which I previously resided in, mostly I was studying at the time, is Grahamstown. I think they've changed the name now, to Makano or something like that, but Grahamstown, which is the complete and exact opposite of Johannesburg, which is high-rise buildings, it's taxis, it's buses, it's tuk-tuks, it's all sorts of things, And obviously Grahamstown was a more quiet, reserved little town.
Are you finding that Johannesburg, though, is good for your comedy content, because there's so much more that is happening and everything here seems more amplified?
Yes, what I would say, though, is coming from the Eastern Cape is nice. I do enjoy it. I feel like it has made my content, definitely has given it some sort of an original flavor. something which some of the people who grew up in Johannesburg perhaps don't have the advantage to have come from somewhere, to be able to observe the differences between the two dynamics, Eastern Cape life and Gauteng life. But Johannesburg, as Takunda said, does provide the platforms for you to do things such as the Johannesburg International Comedy Festival, which in the Eastern Cape, I mean, might take a little while longer for them to get to such a scale, if I can put it that way. So good coming from the Eastern Cape, but good being in Johannesburg and Gauteng.
Now, there'll be quite a lot of comedians at this comedy festival, and won't you bring us into your kind of comedy, and what kind of themes do you talk about in your comedy? Is it more about politics, love? What sort of things do you explore in your comedy? Do you talk a lot about colored people?
Well, I'd have to throw a hint of colored in there, just a sprinkle. But the show that I'm a part of at the festival, it's called Stand Up Africa. That's the name of the show. So the show already, as you can hear, has a certain theme to it. So what I'd like to do is obviously to go with that theme and to structure my humor and my jokes over a 15-minute. I've got a 15-minute time period on stage. So give it a bit of a narrative, give it a bit of African flavor. As you said, sprinkle a little bit of colored in there, because as colored people, obviously, sometimes I find in South Africa there's a bit of an identity issue with colored people. You know, they say, are they colored people? Are they mixed race? You know, are they colored? Are they black? But
they don't have a culture.
Do you know what I'm saying? But one thing is for sure is that colored people are definitely African. And so what I'd like to do is get on stage and at least put a finger on that.
And colored people are definitely funny. I grew up in a colored community, and I can tell you, lots of laughs always involved. Thank you, gentlemen. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for, but thank you so much for your time and all the best. Oh, I know. But we'll come watch you at the comedy, we'll come watch you at the festival where, you know, we know you'll be so much better. That was Takunda Bimha and Prins talking to us about the Johannesburg International Comedy Festival that is set to take place from the 14th to the 17th of March in Johannesburg. Make sure that you get your tickets and just go enjoy some amazing African comedy.